First off, did I miss anybody with one of my cards? It's nice to know that you're able to get a hold of me because it's got all my contact information. But more importantly, on the back of this card is something that I try and share with every Parkinson's patient that I come across, is you really need to have something on your person all the time identifying you as dealing with Parkinson's disease. Because I hear horror stories all the time about, and it even happens in hospitals. You know, you'd think nurses and doctors in hospitals would recognize symptoms of Parkinson's disease, but they confuse them with other things. A friend of mine that had Parkinson had a freezing episode in the hospital in St. Luke's and Cedar Rapids, and they were ready to put him in 3 East, which is the psychiatric ward, because they couldn't get him to respond to their wishes for him to move over. All they needed to do was relax a little bit, and he would have, the freezing episode would have quit. But because he didn't have any information and his wife had gone into the restroom, you know, he was doing this little battle. But, you know, in addition to that, you hear about policemen pulling people over because they're driving erratically, and, you know, all that it is Parkinson's related things. So having something like this at least gives you something that you can show to a person and say, you know, just wait a little bit and I'll be ready to go on from there. So that's the main thing I wanted to share about that. As Brenda said, my name's John Krumbholz. I've had Parkinson's disease for 10 years now. I should tell you a little bit. I have a wife who's been very supportive. We've been married almost 39 years now. I have 3 grown children and 5 grandchildren. And up until 6 years ago, I was a school administrator. I left Mount Vernon Middle School as a middle school principal 6 years ago because it was obvious to me that stress and Parkinson's don't get along well together. And I was fatigued all the time. It wasn't fair to the kids. It wasn't fair to the parents. It wasn't fair to me. And I was able to step down. Didn't know what I was going to do at that point in time. Had no idea that I would become co-president of the American Parkinson's Disease Association. And I accidentally became this. I'll take you down this little memory lane of mine because that's basically what my talk is about. About 7 or 8 years ago, I was talking to somebody and said, you know, we really need to have somebody that's a face for Parkinson's. That goes around, talks to people, that does PSAs and stuff. Excuse me. You might have seen me on the PSA over the last 3 years talking about Parkinson's disease. But I never thought it was going to be me, but I found out that I was the only one that was willing to do it. You know, I've talked in front of people my whole life as a principal. I've not been the facial masking and the lowering of the voice, which happens with many Parkinson's patients. It hasn't manifested itself in me at this point in time. So I've kind of accidentally become the spokesperson. And in so doing, I've created a situation here that we're going to talk about today. And that's, the title of my talk here is Advocacy, the Journey of Living with and Battling Parkinson's Disease. 3 years ago, Kristen Doss asked me to come to Des Moines one day and talk to people who are going to be new leaders of support groups, like Brenda and her mom have agreed to do now. This was a training session for them. And she said, John, I want you to talk about advocacy in Parkinson's. And I said, well, first off, I'm not an advocate for Parkinson's. I don't like Parkinson's at all. I wish I never got it. I don't know anybody that has it that wishes they had gotten it. But I knew she wanted something different from me than a smart aleck remark like that. So I did what most educators do. I went to the dictionary. So let me make sure I got this set. Here we go. And I looked up the word advocacy in the dictionary, and a funny thing happened. I looked at my guide words, because I used to teach 3rd and 4th grade, and I used to teach the kids how to use the guide words in the dictionary. And I knew advocacy was going to be on this page rather. But the first word I came across was advent. And it said an arrival, as in the advance of old age. And I went, that's kind of funny, isn't it? You know, Parkinson's disease comes with old age. What a coincidence. So I went down the page a little further. Adventure was the next word I came with. Difficult and perilous undertaking. And I said, well, isn't that interesting? That describes Parkinson's as well. Next word was adversary. And if you don't trust me, you look on the dictionary. These are all exactly in the order that I'm giving them to you. Adversary, a person or group that's hostile or competing, an opponent, an enemy. And all of a sudden, I'm not the brightest person in the world, but I do have a pretty strong faith component. And I think God puts messages in front of us all the time. Sometimes we ignore them. This seemed to me to be some kind of a message that was going on here. So, went down the page. Whoa. Adverse, unfavorable, difficult, as in adverse circumstances. Finally, I came to advocacy. And it said active advocating, support. I don't know if any of your teachers, did anybody in here teach at any time? What do you tell kids about defining words? Do you ever use the root word to define a word?
Yes. Yeah.
And that's what they seem to have done here. If I didn't know what advocacy was, how would I know what active advocating? So I still didn't think I'd gotten the message. So I continued. And then I came to advocate, which could be used as a verb to plead, in favor of, to urge. I feel like I'm in front of you, I apologize. Or as a noun, one who publicly supports or urges proponent, one who pleads the case of another. And I thought, I'm getting to where I want to be. This is where I'm understanding. Advocacy that Krasanka wanted me to talk about wasn't advocacy for the disease, it was advocacy for the people with the disease. So when it comes to Parkinson's, I think advocacy is a process, a journey of living with and battling Parkinson's disease, and an advocate is one who joins in the army to defeat this insidious disease. Just like those words popped into my head as I was going down the page, how many of you remember the Burma Shave commercials that used to be along the side of the road as you traveled? I thought, God has given me some of those Burma Shave moments about Parkinson's disease. And it's a shame for people to have to find these on their own. But that's the way it is with Parkinson's disease. Those of you that were diagnosed probably had a similar meeting with your neurologist or your doctor when you first went in. You were told that you have Parkinson's disease. And you go, what is it? What causes it? You've got all these questions and there are no answers. They give you some pills, and in my case, which I'm tremor dominant, when the pills are working, my tremor is less noticeable than if it's not. But there's all these things about Parkinson's disease that the doctor never tells you. And so once again, I'm attempting to put kind of a Burma Shave commercial of sorts together for all of you. This is one of my latest and favorite quotes from Michael J. Fox. Matter of fact, I'm wearing it. You might have thought I was just dressing down today wearing a pink t-shirt, but this is the international logo for Parkinson's disease, and you'll notice if you look carefully, there's a PD in the leaves that create the Parkinson's. But anyway, his quote, acceptance doesn't mean resignation. It means understanding that something is what it is, and there's got to be a way through it. This is the most crucial understanding about Parkinson's disease, whether you're a caretaker for somebody or you have the disease yourself. You need to know that you need to get to acceptance. I tell people that getting a diagnosis of a disease like Parkinson's, my shaky right paw just moves that thing enough that I hit the wrong thing. I apologize. Many times when you lose a loved one, you might talk to a minister, a priest, you might talk to a person at the funeral home. And they'll tell you about the Kubler-Ross 5 stages of death and loss. When you are diagnosed with a disease like Parkinson's, you go through the same things you go through as when you lose a loved one. The first thing you do is there's some denial and isolation. Who, me? No, I don't have Parkinson's disease. We all go through it. Some people get stuck in that stage and don't get beyond it. The next stages, you get angry. You know, why did it happen? You know, I didn't deserve this. You start bargaining. At least I did. I go, hey God, I was a pretty good middle school principal. I thought I was anyway. What are you pulling here? You know, I always thought I was doing good work with kids, and you know, everybody was telling me I was doing good work with kids, and all of a sudden, you pull the rug out from underneath me. But he didn't answer me, because he wanted me to find it out for myself. And then depression. Sometimes people just get stuck in depression, and a vast majority of people with Parkinson's disease do deal with depression. There's no doubt about it. Sometimes the medications help, but when you see these first 4 items here, you can see how easy it is to get hung up in any one of those. When I say, a lot of people just go, it's too big of an issue for me, you know, and they literally sit back in their recliner and they go, I'm going to let life take its course. That's the worst thing that you can do with Parkinson's disease, is to quit. That's why you've got to get to this acceptance stage. And when Michael J. Fox says acceptance is not resignation, it means acceptance is not mean you're quitting. It means you understand that you've got something that you have to accomplish, something that you have to fight through, but there will eventually be a cure for this disease. There will eventually be things that will prolong the progression of the disease or slow the progression of the disease. We have some of those things, and I'm going to talk about some of them today. But you have to get to this acceptance point to really continue living your life. This was the very first vermicelli moment that I had. Like I said, I was diagnosed just about exactly 10 years ago now. At this time, my father, who was 85 years old, my oldest brother lives in the Omaha area, and he comes home every summer. It used to be for my father's birthday and a family reunion picnic. And he came home and hadn't seen my father for 3 or 4 months. And he noticed that he didn't look quite well. And he said, have you been to the doctor lately, Dad? And I said, no. Well, if you know my older brother, he's kind of pushy, you know, so he took him in, and those of us that lived right in Cedar Rapids, which is where my dad lives, hadn't noticed it because we saw him all the time. Well, to make a long story short, at the end of all these tests and everything, we found out he had a rare form of lymphoma. And the doctor invited the whole family in for a consultation. And my dad's name was Kenny, and he said, Kenny, you need to get your affairs in order because you're really too old and too weak to undergo any chemotherapy or anything. So you just need to get your affairs in order. Well, the same brother said, what are you talking about, doctor? What do you mean he needs to get his affairs in order? How much time does he have? And he said, I think about a week. So he went from, my mother always had some physical ailments that we knew. But my dad, we always thought he was the rock. He was the caretaker. He was doing all these things. And so to hear this was an amazing blow for the entire family. But it was the best blessing that we could have had too, because so many times you lose somebody you love, they're in a car accident, they die suddenly of a heart attack, any of a myriad of different things. You never get a chance to say the things you want to say, do the things you want to do. And in this case, my mother and father were about to have their 60th wedding anniversary. So we went ahead and had a party for them. It was 4 months ahead of their actual anniversary. But we bought cake and ice cream, and they were living in a facility similar to this, an assisted care facility. But anyway, we all got our chance to say our goodbyes, and I'll never thank God more for it. I get a little emotional at times because I'm passionate about this, what I do. But I thank God that I got a chance to do all those things. Because 5 months later, I was doing the same thing for my mother. we found out that she had ALS, and that had been the source of all of her errors, or all of her ills, rather. And I'll never forget one day I use you as a prop, sir. I was visiting my mother, and she was in a chair similar to the size of yours. And with ALS, she was very crippled up, so she was bent over. So I was talking to her, and my right hand was doing what it's doing right now next to you. And she's staring at my right hand, and I hadn't been diagnosed yet. And she goes, "John, when are you going to the doctor to see why your hand's shaking like that?" And I had gotten an appointment with a neurologist. But I mean, she was a typical mother bear. Here she is. I don't know if you're familiar with ALS, but it's one of the most insidious diseases. It robs the body of all its functionality, but your brain is inside, it's trapped. And my mother was a very bright woman, you know, and to watch her deteriorate like that, and then to sit there in a room and have her tell me I should be going to the doctor rather than worrying about herself. But that's what she was. She was a mama bear right to the very end. And it was the very end because it was 5 months after my dad had passed. My brother, my youngest brother, got cancer about 4 years ago, and he was gone 6 months later. So my first Burma shade moment is, life could have dealt me a worse hand. My mother, my father, my brother, a lot of my friends have already died as a result of diseases that they have. And I was talking to Brenda because in the newspaper it had a fact that I'm not questioning the fact, but it's one I wasn't familiar with. It said that Parkinson's is the 14th leading cause of death. What usually happens is you'll see in the newspaper that so-and-so died from complications of Parkinson's disease. And then you look into it a little bit further and you find out that the complication was that they didn't walk very steadily. They fell and broke a hip. They got pneumonia. They died from pneumonia, but it goes into the statistics as Parkinson's. But Parkinson's very seldom, sometimes with Lewy body Parkinson's, it's a cause of death, but very seldom is it really the cause of death. But it does force you to forever change the way you live your life. And that's where you get into that, not getting hung up with that anger and the depression and all that. Because if you're willing to make changes, there's a lot of living left to do. And that's what I'm here for, is to help you to live that. So we could have been dealt a worse hand. Second Parkinson's moment, as far as a Burma shade type moment that I found out, was you need to find and join a support group. That's one of the reasons I come out to groups like this. And I'm so excited when I know that one is starting up for an area that hasn't had that. Because you absolutely need this. Just like I said before, you need to listen and learn from other people who have the disease. The doctors are well-intentioned. The neurologists are well-intentioned. Some of you may even go to somebody that's considered a movement disorder neurologist, which means that's their specialty, is diseases like Parkinson's. But they still don't live the disease. They don't go through the day in, day out trials and tribulations. Sometimes they have no clue what it's really like. But your fellow Parkies will have a clue. 2 examples. First support group I went to in Cedar Rapids, Dr. Rich from the university, who's my neurologist right now, is giving a talk, and he says, here's an interesting case study. He said a young man in his mid-40s, diagnosed with Parkinson's disease, was put on Mirapex. Mirapex, for those of you that don't know, is one of the drugs. It's called an agonist. Mirapex, Requip, Nupro are all agonists. But anyway, he developed a gambling problem. And he lost his boat, maxed out 3 credit cards before he realized what was going on. And a guy in the back of the room, once again, this is my first meeting there, raises his hand, he goes, "Doc, that's me." And Dr. Rich goes, "No, we keep this very confidential, we just pulled this out of the records, and no identifying information." And he goes, "Well, is it patient 65943 or whatever the number was? I don't remember the number." Well, Dr. Rich turned about the color of your top. He was as red as a beet because it was him. But then the guy went on and said, "Don't worry about it, Doc. We tell everybody everything here. That's how we get through all the challenges that we have." So, two things. First off, I've got this guy that's willing to open himself up in front of a group of people. I was the only newbie there, but in front of a group of people because it might help somebody else. And second thing, I was on Mirapex. That was the drug that they put me on. So I'm looking at my wife, she's looking at me. We go, the doctor didn't tell us that this might be a side effect, you know, some kind of compulsive behavior. And since then I learned it's not just gambling. You might be a compulsive eater, you might drink compulsively, it might drive you to drugs. It has to do with the dopamine, which is also a key. And if you've ever read or learned much about people that have addictive behaviors, they usually have an overproduction of dopamine in their system. But the neurologist never told me this. And my wife and I just said, well, the drug's working pretty well, so I think we're going to stick with it, but we'll just keep an eye on it. Well, it was a miracle drug for a year and a half. We'd go places and people would go, well, which one of you have Parkinson's disease? And because they couldn't tell, because my hand wasn't even tremoring like it's tremoring right now. Labor Day that year, a year and a half later, it had led up to this. But I'm down and some of you may have sleep disorders. You wake up in the middle of the night, can't get back to sleep. That's pretty common with Parkinson's disease. I decided I was going to start going down to Riverside Casino. Now you have to understand, I never gambled in my life. I mean, I gambled. I played nickel, penny ante poker and stuff like that. But I didn't want to lose my money to casinos. I knew they were in the business of making money. But all of a sudden I had this urge at 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning, as long as I couldn't sleep, maybe I'd just go down there and play the slots for a while or play blackjack for a while. And I didn't lose a ton of money, but I did go down there a number of times. And on Labor Day of that year, I'm down there at 4 o'clock in the morning, and I'm looking around, and I do have a habit of being judgmental. And I'm going, look at the losers that are down here in this casino at 4 o'clock in the morning. And then all of a sudden, as God sometimes does, showed my big noggin reflecting off the glass in a slot machine. And I mean, I literally came to the awareness or the epiphany that I was one of those losers. I was on the verge of becoming one of those. And I went home and I said to my wife, which she was sleeping normally, she didn't know, or she did know that I got up, she just figured I was down on the computer or something else. I said, you'll never guess where I was. Well, she didn't guess, and I told her, and she said, you're getting off that medication right now, which I did. I got off it the next day, and within 3 weeks' time, I had no compulsion to go down to the casino again. I still would go down there if some couples were going or something like that, but I wouldn't drive down there by myself, not because I feel guilty. I don't have that habitual pull to come down there. The only reason I knew about that was because I went to a support group. The second part of this same story, the doctor, when I called him the next day, immediately put me on carbidopa-levodopa, Cinemet, the gold standard for medications. Gold standard only because it's been around for 60 years, not because it's, and the drug companies don't want to spend enough money to see anything work any better. But I started taking that, and I started every morning, this is when I was still a principal, I'd get stomach cramps and side cramps so badly within 15 minutes, I'd be down on our dining room floor trying to stretch and somehow relieve this pressure that was being caused by these pills. And I'd call up the neurologist, and the neurologist would say, this is what you got to do, you know, it'll eventually start working for you, you got to kind of live with it. Well, after about 3 weeks of living with it, taking 2 shirts with me every day when I went into work, because I'd break out in cold sweats. After I had the cramping episodes, I'd break out in cold sweats and literally soak a shirt, change to another shirt. I thought, I'm getting a little tired of this, you know, just live with it, it'll straighten itself out. So I went back to my support group, to my Parkies. And I said, is anybody here having any problems with meds? Boom, 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 you know, and several people told me their stories. Somebody said, well, first thing you have to understand, John, is what it says on the label. Take 2 pills 5 times a day. That doesn't mean you have to take them exactly 4 hours apart. You might take a pill, wait a couple hours, take another pill, wait a couple hours. You're not changing the prescription. you're changing how it's delivered based on your body and the way that the drug reacts to your body. The other thing somebody else said, eat them with a cracker. Sometimes that will do it. And so I tried that, you know, and pretty soon this all smoothed out. And then my sister-in-law, who works for Drug Town, I still call it Drug Town, it's Hy-Vee, drug, whatever they call it now. She said, the other thing, John, is, you know, they put buffers in these pills, and sometimes you're reacting to the buffer. So if you find one that's working for you, you tell your pharmacy that you want that provider from now on to do that. I'm sitting there going, why didn't my neurologist tell me any of this? Why did he just tell me to suck it up and things would be better? It did get better, but it got better because things my fellow Parkies told me. So everything that we do is helped by being around a support group like you're trying to create here. So I can't, if there's nothing else I leave you with today at all, you are on the right track to get something like this going. And there's going to be another track that I'm going to tell you that you need to get going on too. But see, I'm just over the 25-mile mark. You know, if you're talking 25 miles away from where you live, you're an expert. Well, I'm an expert because I'm just a little bit further than that. You go to Cedar Rapids, I don't know anything. So, but next moment, Burma Shade moment. Realize that Parkies need to advocate for themselves. If you're not willing to advocate yourself, don't expect anyone else to do it for you. This was probably about 7 or 8 years ago, and this is what drove me to join the board of the American Parkinson's Disease Association. Because I realized there wasn't that much going on in terms of raising money for research, and I wanted to know why. And it was about the time that I was considering leaving the principalship, so I wanted to be more involved. And once again, I'm still bargaining with God during this time. You know, I make that sound like those first 4 stages that you go through. It takes years to get through them. You know, I finally put a pity party on for myself. I baked myself a cake, you know, had a heck of a good time, and then threw the rest of it away and accepted what I'm dealing with. But one of the things that we need to deal with is we can't wait for somebody else to come in and solve these problems for us. If you knew the figures on what the government spends for research for Parkinson's, you'd be appalled. It costs our country $14.4 billion a year for Parkinson's, for lost wages, medical costs, increased insurance costs, and they spend less than $100 million, you know, in research. If they somehow would equalize those two, so I'm sure we would have a cure by now. And you even hear Michael J. Fox talk about it a lot. At one time he was saying, when he was early diagnosed, that he'd like to see a cure in 10 years. Well, I think he's found out that the government doesn't do that. But so one of the things we did in Cedar Rapids, and I've got some copies of it if anybody here is a golfer, if you know anybody that's a golfer. We started 9 years ago having a golf outing that we tried to raise money for the state board, because the state board doesn't have any way to generate funds. Well, we've raised over $10,000 each of the last 9 years. Last year we actually raised $20,000. This is just the Cedar Rapids support groups through this golf outing. So we've had very good support. We would like to expand it further yet, get it into more of Eastern Iowa, but once again, I've got some sheets there if anybody's interested. I'd be glad to give them to you. You might know somebody that would want to contribute to it. It's amazing to me, a good buddy of mine that's helped me with this the last 9 years, you know, it was amazing because he used to be a sheet metal worker, and when he couldn't do that anymore because of his Parkinson's, he kind of lost his identity a little bit. He was floating around in that depression and in denial stage and everything, didn't know what would really make his life better. Well, he started going out and asking people. He'd just walk into a business and say, we're having this Parkinson's golf outing, would you like to contribute it? And you know, some people would say no, and some people started saying yes. And the biggest yes that he got was from his own union, the Sheet Metal Workers Union in Cedar Rapids. They became our biggest supporter. And as he got those yeses, his self-confidence just began to climb. And now, you know, he's doing so much better because he knows what he needs to be doing. And it's to advocate for himself. Pride is the first thing to go when you have Parkinson's disease. Another, I think it's kind of a cute story. Once again, God has provided me with some situations that are unbelievable as far as I'm concerned. If you would have told me 12 years ago that some of these things would have happened to me, like the moment in the casino, you know, the reflection of my own big head and what a loser I was about to become if I didn't make some changes. But 6 years ago, when I decided I was going to step down from being a principal, that it just wasn't working for me anymore, got a call from the person that was our director at that time. Her name was Sam Irwin. That's who Prasanka took over for. But Sam says, "Hey, Michael J. Fox is coming to Des Moines. You know, he's going to play in the Principal Charity Classic. Would you like to come down?" On Thursday night, they had a soiree down at Prairie Meadows. I always find it kind of interesting. Parkinson's, and I'm not the only one that's had problems with gambling. All the time they have things at Riverside and Prairie Meadows, you know, and you go, couldn't we find another meeting place besides some place filled with gambling? But anyway, I said, sure, I'd like to come down there. And this was, I was just finishing up my last year being a principal, and to be truthful, I didn't know whether I'd be wearing a blue vest and say, welcome to Walmart, or what I'd be doing, you know, after I stepped down from there. But I did know that I wanted to go down and meet him. Well, I went down there that Thursday night, and it was a big, you know, as fundraiser type things are like that, a lot of big name people from the Des Moines area, big dollar people, and I got as much of a chance to meet him as they paraded us up there and said, "Hi, Mr. Fox," and they took a picture, and then he was gone and I was gone. But they were auctioning off a chance to be his honorary caddy the next day for 9 holes at the Prairie Principal Classic, Charity Principal Classic in Des Moines. And so I figured, well, I don't know if I'm going to have enough money for this, but I'm going to stick around. And as it was the last thing being auctioned off. And they started it off at $3,000. And I said, I know I'm not going to pay $3,000 for this. I went down to $2,500, $2,000, $1,500, $1,000. Nobody bidding on it at all. A lot of people leaving. Finally, they get it down to $500, and I thought, I can spring for $500. And I'm just ready to bid, and the auctioneer goes, "Sold!" to the person in the first row. And I said, what happened to the auction process here? You know, I was always used to somebody makes a bid, and then you get a chance to up that bid. But as luck would have it, golf's 18 holes, so they were selling the other 9. I got that for just a little bit more than the $500, so I was happy. But I got there the next morning, and once again, stress and Parkinson's don't play well together. The shuttle bus I was riding was late. And so I had to kind of do double time to get to the first tee, and I didn't know whether I'd make it there in time for their first shot or I'd be trailing behind them. I got there just in time for the Kodak moment again. The pro was there. Michael was there. As long as I use you a prop once, can I use you as a prop again? I won't hurt you, I promise. But I'm standing like this, the pro's here, and Michael's right over there. They're taking our picture. And I'm stressed out, so my hand's flopping, and I'm doing this to the pro, you know, just banging him. My hand was like a fish thrown on a deck somewhere, you know, and just flopping around. And they got the picture taken. They started heading down the fairway, and the pro was kind of walking behind me a little bit, and he said, "Well, John, you can relax." I said, "I'm perfectly relaxed." You know, it's kind of like I am now. My hand's shaking, but I'm not nervous. That's not why it's shaking. And he said, "Well, why is your hand shaking?" I said, "Because I got Parkinson's disease." He said, "You have Parkinson's disease?" I said, "Yeah." And he goes, "Michael is probably about over where the bushes are on the other side of the driveway there." And the pro goes, "Hey Michael, did you know John's got Parkinson's disease?" So not only does Michael know it now, but all of West Des Moines knows it as well. But once again, pride's the first thing that goes out the window with Parkinson's disease. And Michael just immediately headed over. I mean, Parkies, we have this kind of a magnetic attraction. You know, once you hear somebody's got Parkinson's disease, you just want to get with them and find out what meds they're taking and how they're battling with it. Anyway, he came over and we started talking and walking together. We got to about the fourth hole, and he said, you know, if you know much about the story of Michael J. Fox, he's renowned to be the very best at mixing his drugs, cocktails of his drugs, so that he's able to perform on stage or on a show like Letterman or whatever, you know, without gyrating too much. Well, he said, you know, I'm off. My meds are off. I don't know if I can swing the club. And I said, well, don't swing it. He said, well, what, you know, people are expecting me to play golf. And I said, Michael, they're expecting to see you. I don't want to shake your very core, but they didn't come out here to watch you play golf. They just wanted to be where you're at. And if you need to go sit down in your cart and rest up, because usually, those of you that take meds know, in about 20 minutes, half hour, it kicks in, and then you're feeling better, and then you can swing the club again. He said, well, maybe you're right. So he goes over and sits in the cart, and I'm walking down the fairway, and I go, you're just lecturing Michael J. Fox about when to take his medications? But he got back out and played, and we got to the end of the ninth hole. And those of you that are familiar with golf, there's roped off areas. If you're inside the rope, you're a player, a caddy, somebody that's important. And I was important that day because I paid to be important that day. But then you go outside the rope. So I was saying my goodbyes to everybody and saying, you know, in essence, knew that I needed to get on the other side of the ropes. And Michael said, where do you think you're going? I said, well, I only paid to do this for 9 holes. He said, I don't care what you paid to do it for 9 holes. You know, you're not going anywhere. You're staying right here. And as luck would have it, the person that bought the other 9 holes was more interested in being with the pro. So I literally walked around 18 holes with Michael J. Fox. For those of you that know how long golf takes, that's about 5 hours. He's just as nice and genuine of a man in person as he appears on most of the TV shows. I know he's had some roles where he's been kind of a bad guy. But the thing that was most impressive to me was how much he goes through to play a game of golf. He has so many more manifestations than I have. You know, you see him on shows every once in a while, and you'll see the dyskinesia where he's rolling his shoulders. That's actually not a symptom of Parkinson's. That's a byproduct of carbidopa levodopa. So you take the medicine, and it relieves your symptoms. It causes dyskinesia, or you don't take it, and then you got the symptoms. So you're kind of damned if you do, damned if you don't. But in addition to that, he's got dystonia so bad that when he's walking down the fairway, he's literally walking on the sides of it. I tell people, you know, if he had a brand new pair of shoes, he'd never have to replace the spikes because they never hit the ground. The sides of the shoes would wear out before the bottoms of the shoes would. But he doesn't let it stop him. He's going to keep going. He's going to keep trying. He's not going to worry about what people think of him or what he looks like. I mean, that was a real rocking moment for me. That that's what we all need to do, is not to worry about what anybody else thinks. Worry about what we can do and what we can still do. And there are some things that you have to give up. Like, I'm a golfer. I'm not a good golfer. I never was a good golfer. But I love the game. But when you've got a hand tremor like mine tremors, it's kind of hard to play sometimes. I used to play with some buddies, and I'd be putting over here at Don, and I'd hit it over there by that little statue, and they'd go, they were yucking it up. They were really having a good time at my expense. But they thought I had the yips. This was before I was ever diagnosed with Parkinson's disease. Once I was diagnosed and I realized what I might be dealing with, I went to a long putter, and those of you that might have seen people on TV or golfing, I now pin the putter up here with my shaky right hand, and I do a kind of a pendulum arc that I'm a better putter than I ever was before, and it's because of Parkinson's disease. And sometimes when I can't get my hands to quiet down, I I sometimes chip one-handed, and people that play with me the first time, I always wait for them to bring it up because I'm just dying, because they're going to bring it up because you don't see somebody chipping one-handed very often. And I've really gotten fairly good at it. Once again, probably better than I was before. But I just share with them that that's an adjustment that I needed to make for Parkinson's, which goes back to what I was saying before. Parkinson's will seldom take your life, but it will make you change forever the way you live your life. Well, by making those changes, I've been able to continue to play golf. You know, sometimes on the long shots, it's not as pretty as I'd like it to be, but actually the tremor, because it's a resting tremor, will stop when I pull the trigger. If I pull the trigger, I mean start to swing. So my hand will be tremoring here, and it's stopped. It will stay stopped as I complete the swing. You don't want to know that much about my golf game. No. That's just an adjustment that you make for Parkinson's. This is another I don't know if I want to say I'm trying to scold people, but when you choose to stop living, you choose to start dying. And I took this quote from Shawshank Redemption, which is one of my favorite movies, and Andy Dufresne is talking to Morgan Freeman at one point in time, and he says something similar to this. I think he says, you either begin to start living or begin to start dying. That's why I wrote it the way that I did. But this is a choice that you have to make with Parkinson's disease. And it's an actual choice. We don't get a lot of choices with this disease. We certainly didn't get a choice whether we wanted it or not. We didn't get a choice how it was going to present itself. You know, I've probably met between 800,000 and 900,000 people with Parkinson's disease. No two of them have the same symptoms. Some of them share some symptoms, but exactly the same. I've never met two that have. So you didn't get any choice there. You don't get any choice when it's going to start manifesting. You know, I was a 55-year-old male, which, you know, when you look it up in the encyclopedia, it'll say Parkinson's disease strikes more males than it does females. Usually, man starts manifesting symptoms mid-50s. You go, I was 55, male. I could have been the poster child of Parkinson's disease. But you don't get to pick those things. But you do get to pick this, and that's your choice in whether you want to continue living a life with integrity, with joy. You know, I've got 5 grandchildren, 6, 6, 5, 4, and 3 months. I don't have time to start dying just yet. I'm too busy trying to be Grandpa John to those kids. And everybody's got their things that they really would like to do, and then they just need to come to grips with the fact that they can't let Parkinson's disease win. You never, never, never give up. Maybe when you're in the casket one day, you can say, I'm going to rest from this point on, but up until that time, you know. Talking about golf, I was down in Phoenix about 3 years ago, and I saw this, and I just thought, this is about Parkinson's too. And it was in a card shop. It was written on a card. And I've tried to find the author. I can't find an author for it. But it's so true. Just when the caterpillar thought his life was over, he became a butterfly. You know, and that's the way it is with Parkinson. That's what I think has happened to me a little bit in terms of becoming this accidental spokesperson for Parkinson's. I didn't know what I was going to be doing. Like I said before, I didn't know if I'd be wearing a blue vest, welcoming people at Walmart, or what I do. But all of a sudden it dawned on me somewhere along the way that God's plan for me is to talk to people about Parkinson's. To talk for people that don't feel comfortable enough to stand up themselves, to talk in front of a group, to provide people with some berm-shaped signs in order to better deal with the challenges that they have in their life. So I don't know if you can picture me as a butterfly or not. A pretty chubby butterfly, maybe a moth or something like that, but you get the point anyway. This is something that I learned just last fall, and it's so true and it's so important. But once again, you're not going to hear this from your neurologist. Your neurologist gives you that medication it takes care of your manifestation, your symptoms for the most part. But it really only takes care of half of the problem in Parkinson's. The other half is what I call the PMSs, not making fun of the disorder PMS. But the first one is you have to remain physically active. We strongly support a class called Related Disease throughout all of Iowa. We will train people to be certified trainers in this disease. We just started our second group in Cedar Rapids. We have one that met on Mondays and Fridays for the last 2 years. Now we've got one meeting on the northeast side on Tuesdays and Thursdays. So people have the opportunity to go 4 times a week if they want to. And anybody at any stage of Parkinson's disease can participate in this program. But if you can't participate in that, or if you choose to participate in something else, you know, some people ride a bike, be it a stationary bike or a regular bike. Other people swim. I don't care what you do, but you have to stay physically active. If you don't stay physically active, once again, you're only dealing with half of the Parkinson's. The other thing that you have to do is stay mentally engaged. Once again, every morning when I get up, I read the newspaper, I do the crossword puzzle. I belong to a thing on the computer called Lumosity, which challenges me to the max with some of the games that they have you do. But if you don't keep your brain active and engaged, it's going to atrophy on you. You know, and the longer you do that, the more you challenge yourself. So once again, you challenge yourself physically, you challenge yourself mentally. And the last thing, and this is the one that so many people forget and don't think it's important. It's usually because, remember when I demonstrated sitting in the lounge chair, there's a lot of people that give up with this disease. They don't want to be around their friends anymore. They don't want to be around their family anymore. They don't feel comfortable, and in so doing, they become isolated. And when you become isolated with Parkinson's, it's a self-defeating cycle that you undergo. So, you know, what I tell people is that you have to do the physical, the mental, and the social things. And don't worry about what other people think. Don't worry about what you look like. And that's one of the main reasons that the support groups are so important, because they're less threatening for a lot of people. If you're going to meet with other Parkies, they might be having some of the same problems you're having. And one of the things I find is the caregivers get as much out of the meetings. You know, and some people get the wrong idea about a support group. I think they think we sit around holding hands, singing Kumbaya or something like that. You know, it isn't a woe is me thing. We do active things. Like I told you about the golf tournament. This June 18th, we have a night at the ballpark, the Colonel's ball game, which, by the way, you're all invited to. All you need to do is you got my number, call me, and I'll have tickets ready for you when you come. But we do those kinds of things together because it's important to socially interact. April is Parkinson's Awareness Month. We brought down a karaoke machine to the church hall that we, you know, and it's amazing to me. There's people that would no more sing karaoke than a man in the moon, and all of a sudden there's 10 other people up there singing, and it's a song they like, and they kind of ease their way up there. And next thing you know, they're belting it out, and before long, you know, they might be doing a duet with somebody. And it's so important for the voice, because it's like I said, the disease hasn't manifested itself with my voice at this point in time, and I hope it never will. I continue to try and talk, and I actually go out and sing karaoke every once in a while. I'm not bad, I'm not good, but once again, I don't care what anybody else thinks. I'm doing it because I don't want to lose my voice. Because my voice is the one thing that I've got that I still think is pretty important. This is just talking about physical activity again. The only thing that slows the progression of this disease is exercise. Medications take care of your symptoms. You don't do anything about slowing. If you know what Parkinson's disease is, Michael J. Fox says when his little finger started tremoring when he was about 29 years old, 80% of the part of his brain that produces dopamine was gone. And when I say gone, it's never coming back. So your challenge is, how do I get the 20% left to keep me going as long as I can? Well, physical exercise is the one, because if you don't move it, you're going to lose it. And then I just tell you a little bit more about crossword, Sudoku, and challenge yourself with any puzzles you can mentally. Just talked to a good friend of mine that actually started the Cedar Rapids group, talked to his wife. He's been having a lot of problems here lately. And she said, John, don't forget to tell people how important it is to laugh. The only thing that's kept Dave going is he hasn't lost his sense of humor. Dave meaning her husband. I couldn't remember if there are any Daves in the group, but I wasn't pointing anybody out here. But there's plenty of time to cry later on. You know, save that for your funeral or whatever. But for right now, choose to laugh. Choose to not look at the negative side of things all the time. Once again, we can't do this alone. We need to create an army of Iowans. You know, when I joined the board down in Des Moines, I was the only one outside of Des Moines that was on the Iowa chapter of the APDA. Now we've got a couple more people. But we've really been trying to reach out. I've done basically this kind of a talk in about 30 different communities throughout the state of Iowa. Just trying to let them know that we are here to help you. We're here to help every single person, but at the same time, we're here to kind of build that camaraderie so that we will have this army of Iowans. I don't know how many of you are aware, but Iowa's the second leading state in the nation in terms of the prevalence of Parkinson's disease per capita. And the other top 5, anybody want to guess on the other top 5? I told you Nebraska was number 1. South Dakota, North Dakota, Minnesota, and Wisconsin probably comes in at about number 7. You know, so once again, back 10 years ago when I was diagnosed and I asked the doctor what causes this, they were very mum about it. They had no idea. What do you suppose they're saying nowadays? That might be one of the causes, especially knowing Iowa, Nebraska, South Dakota.
Farming, pesticides.
Chemicals in the groundwater is a very possible cause. They don't have it nailed down yet, but I think, you know, if it quacks like a duck and walks like a duck and flies like a duck, it's probably a duck. So it's certainly one of the things that goes with Parkinson's. If you let it, this disease will rob you. It'll rob you of your mobility, it'll rob you of your balance, it'll rob you of your voice, it'll rob you of your independence, and it'll rob you of your dignity. But you don't have to let it. I personally refuse to let this disease win. And I think each and every one of you should decide right now that you're not going to deal with that either. Just refuse. Just say, I'm going to keep living my life the way I choose. Make some choices. And that's all I have for you, but I'd be glad to answer any questions that you have. Or once again, if there's anything that any of you would like to know and you don't want to ask it in front of a crowd, you can always call me. You've got my number. A couple things I want to point out are in the back. One is these little tulip pins. They're very nice little pins. They're back there. You're welcome to take one or more of them. It doesn't make any difference to me. The gray band, the gray is the color for Parkinson's. I don't know who the heck thought that up. I think the gray come up with something a little bit. You talk about a depressing thing, but I don't have any choice in that matter. These little bookmarks that are back there are probably the most precious items out of everything that's back there. Really does a good job outlining the symptoms of Parkinson's. And so many people go, well, you know, I don't have a tremor, I must not have Parkinson's. Only about 60% of people with Parkinson's have tremors. Everybody with Parkinson's has bradykinesis, which is slow movement. But it talks about motor and non-motor symptoms. We had a seminar in Waterloo about a month and a half ago, and we called it Parkinson's Dirty Little Secrets. Because there's so many things that you don't know, because nobody tells you. Your neurologist doesn't tell you. We were having a thing, once again, we were having a deep brain stimulation seminar down at Riverside. And it just amuses me. But Sam Irwin was down there, and the rug down there was a patterned rug. And she was down there to evaluate, you know, the room for its ability to have this conference in it. She said, I'm a little worried about that, John. You know, you see those lines in the rug. You know, some people with Parkinson's that have freezing episodes, they will come to one of those lines and there might as well be a brick wall there. They can't go any further than what they've already gone. I said, you're kidding me. And I kind of knew that was true, but this was pretty early on with the disease with me. Then she said, and then if they need to go to the bathroom real badly, you know, they could have an accident. It'd be really embarrassing. And I went, what are you talking about? And she said, well, you know the frequency of needing to urinate and the urgency of needing to urinate. You know, that goes with Parkinson's. And I said, you mean when I've been driving down the interstate and I go by a rest stop and my wife says, you need to make a stop? And I say no. And a mile down the road I have to go so badly that I think I'm going to wet myself. That's Parkinson's? And she says, that's exactly what it is. And there's constipation, there's loss of smell. You know, and some of these things like the loss of smell, I figure most people that start demonstrating symptoms of Parkinson's probably lost their sense of smell maybe 5 years before that or more. You know, my wife's been asking me for years, you know, did you smell that? And you know, we'll be driving down this time of year when there's fertilizers on the ground. I don't smell anything. Believe it or not, you know, I know you'll believe it affects your taste because that whole experience of eating, I haven't lost a ton of weight as a result of this, but I don't really eat or enjoy food as much as I once did. But they're hoping that they can determine some things that might then be precursors for Parkinson's. And before you're diagnosed, maybe they can get you on a regimen of some pharmaceuticals that might delay the onset of the disease, which I would imagine if I asked anybody in the room, if you could have got it a couple years later or 3 years later, would you take that? Well, yeah, I would have liked to have been 58 or 59, maybe 100 before that I started getting the symptoms. But anyway, these just talk about some of those non-motor symptoms that you don't see. And the last thing, and this is very, very short notice, but there's some folders back there.
I've got some right here.
Davis Phinney Foundation. If you don't know who Davis Phinney is, don't slap yourself because I didn't know until about a year and a half ago. Davis Phinney was a famous bicyclist at the same time that Lance Armstrong was doing all the things that he did. You never heard about Davis Phinney because all we ever heard about was Lance Armstrong and how many Tour de France's he won and everything else. But Davis Phinney won legs of the Tour de France. He won millions of dollars in cycling, and then was diagnosed with Parkinson's disease. And he has used a good portion of the money he raised and actually won himself to create a foundation. And they're coming to Des Moines next Friday, so it's less than a week away. There's no charge for this, but the total emphasis is on living well with Parkinson's disease. Making some of those decisions, some of those choices that I told you about, they're going to help you to do that. It just is an excellent opportunity. If you didn't invite me a little earlier, I'm not putting regret it because you just knew that I was around and able to do this. But if anybody has a chance to go to this, you will not regret it. It's going to be a wonderful Friday. And the little thing that I would throw in there too is we have a bus that we've chartered that's leaving from St. Patrick's in Cedar Rapids. That's right on 1st Avenue in Cedar Rapids. Take you right to the door of the conference center, pick you up after the conference center, and take you right back to St. Pat. So instead of driving all the way to Des Moines, if you could somehow get a ride to St. Pat's in Cedar Rapids, we take you the rest of the way.
So your balance seems pretty well. Have you had to use a cane or a walker or anything
No.
yet?
I really consider myself blessed.
Yeah.
I'm what's known as tremor dominant.
Okay.
That's what it is. I've slowed down a lot. You know, you see me early in the morning. You see me late at night. I don't think it's pretty. I don't know. But it just comes with the disease. Like I said before, that bradykinesis hits everybody. Everybody slows down. But I've been blessed, and you know, my neurologist keeps telling me you've got the slowest progressing type of. But once again, I think that blessing is also a challenge for me personally. I think the reason God has me progressing a little bit more slowly is so that I can go out and talk to people. It gets harder to do that as time goes on. I've noticed it's different 3 years ago than it is now. But
do people with Parkinson's want to sleep more? Can that be a, because my dad right now, he's very early diagnosis, but all he wants to do is sleep and stay in bed. And I think he's still battling the denial and the depression. And
he absolutely is, and I've never met him before, but he is. But there is a physical part of that too. You know, like me, for instance, the tremoring goes on all the time. You know, and there's fatigue as a factor, and some of the medications you take. When I was taking the Mirapex, the one that took me to gambling, when I didn't want it to take me to gambling, it also created almost a sleep disorder, because I remember one time I went to pick up my daughter in Chicago. She'd flown in, and she's over in Scotland, and we were having pizza, and I fell asleep at the table. We were just sitting there, and all of a sudden my head dropped down. She goes, "Dad, you asleep?" And I went, "Yeah, it must have been." And so then I had to take another drug to combat the sleepiness of the drug that I was taking. Anyway, there's a lot of that. There's a physical reason why he's probably tired all the time. But if he's recently diagnosed, I'd say the bigger reason is, it's like I said before, one of the 4 negative things that you have to get through. And I don't know any other way to do it. You know, sometimes a family's a little too close to get somebody to get through it.
Yep.
I offer myself up all the time, and I would offer to you or anybody else in the room if you had somebody that just needed somebody to talk to about it. And it might even be something that, you know, they just want to vent about it. Yeah. I'm a big boy. I can handle that. But they need to, it's like I said kiddingly before, they need to have their pity party, get beyond it, and then go on living your life. There's plenty of time to cry later on. There's plenty of time to feel sorry for yourself, but it doesn't help you a bit. And what you really need to do is say, this is what I still want to do with my life. This is what's important, and I'm going to do it. And that's easier said than done sometimes, but
I would say you're right on with the support group thing, because we have a cancer support group here in town, and I hear repeatedly people talk about how much it helps them to hear things from each other more than, I mean, this sounds funny, but it really isn't. I know early on one of the things that they were able to teach each other is when you lose your hair and have a wig and you're a woman, you can't bend down and get stuff out of the oven. You're gonna melt the hair.
yeah.
And no doctor or nurse is going to know that or tell you that. So that's the kind of stuff they can share with one another. And, you know, somebody that's been through what you're going through can really help.
Another thing that we do about 3 times a year is we divide up in our group parkies on one side of the room, caregivers on the other side of the room. Because sometimes, and it goes both ways. The one person with Parkinson's disease doesn't want to ask something that might reveal what they think is a weakness or another imperfection in them in front of their caregiver. Or a caregiver doesn't want to ask a question thinking that they'll embarrass the parkie. But the bottom line is they need to have answers to these questions. So we have these open and frank discussions that occur outside of the regular meeting that just are either parkies or caregivers. And I say the word caregivers, and I'd pay somebody $25 if you come up with a better word than that, because I hate it. I just don't think I need a caregiver, but that's what my wife is called. But I still get along pretty well myself, but I need her help with a lot of things. But I just don't like that word caregiver.
If I can interrupt for a second,
And I apologize, and we can do more questions afterwards, but I just wanted to, I want to give, this is Miles and Morgan here, by the way, and I want to let them run outside a little bit, but I need to supervise, and I want their mom to have a chance to. Well, I want you to look around the table if you like, and that's why I'm interrupting, is to let you know we have the materials on both tables, and feel free to take whatever you'd like. If there's only one item on the table, though, please leave that, and then I have a sheet over on this first table where you can put down your name and such, and what you would like for me to get for you, okay? So that's all I really wanted to say, and now I can turn it back over to John and more questions if needs be. And we can go back out if we need to.
The question was, you mentioned
Seriously, Melissa, I'm
something that just started in the Northeast. So that there's 4 times.
And I can hear everything from in there.
Right, we meet Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, and Friday.
Okay, and when is that?
It's called Delay the Disease. So we meet for about an hour each of those days. And we'll start off doing things. It isn't like you run laps around the gym or anything like that. We'll start out doing things like the first 15 minutes you don't even get out of your chair. You're just doing things like, you know, posture is the main part of Parkinson's. And in order to combat that, you have to do things like pinch your shoulder blades together. So we'll do a lot of this kind of stuff, changing the position of the hands, doing this. A lot of things where we cross over, like we do a rope pull, we pretend to do a rope pull coming down, and doing that repeatedly. Anytime you cross the midline of the body, they say it helps develop some new neural pathways. And once again, without getting scientific or anything about it, the reason Parkinson's does the thing it does is because the normal pathways, the messages that used to go from the brain to parts of your body takes, you can't take them anymore, they're cluttered. I tell people this is oversimplistic, but my hand shaking is just an example. You probably all have either digital TV or cable TV, or you've seen it anyway at times when it pixelizes in bad weather. That's what my body is doing to some message somewhere in my body. It's pixelizing and it's coming out in my hand as a tremor. And when you get those freezing moments, those are times when your television screen freezes up and there's an image on there that doesn't go away. It's a way to compare it or a way to think about it. I told you about the people who have freezing episodes and sometimes they can't move. This is just a little simple laser pointer. They found that sometimes people that have freezing moments, they're walking along, they can't go any further. If you shoot a red dot in front of them, it creates a whole new neural pathway. They're not walking along like they usually walk. They're now walking to the red dot and it opens them up and they're able to walk. I had a guy up in western Iowa that was having a problem swinging a golf club, and he'd freeze like up here. And I said, just have one of your friends, get one of the, they're like $3 at Walmart or something like that. Put it on the ball, you know, now he's not swinging at the golf ball anymore like he always did. Swinging at the red dot. And it helped him. So, I mean, it's just amazing the tricks that your mind plays. But, and I don't know what the original question was, or if I answered it, or
I just asked you.
I sometimes get off on these trips down to Never Land. And
one other question we had, you talked about urinary frequency and urgency. And what, is there anything you've got from support groups about that?
Stay close to the bathroom. No, there's some medications you can take for it, but, you know, I personally, 10 years ago, I would have told you that I don't take any pills at all. You know, maybe a vitamin or something like that. Now I've got this tackle box, you know, they don't make them big enough for me, you know, because they're only 7 days long and 4 time periods, and I need 5 time periods. So I've gone from no pills to like 35 pills a day. So to take one more pill, because I have to go to the bathroom more often, I don't think it's worth it. I'll just
deal with it.
Yeah.
Those, we took those for a while. They counteract
partisan medication.
Yeah, they can. You get a lot of things that interact. And it's really kind of dangerous at times. Last fall, I had a bout with cellulitis, which I'd never spent a day in the hospital in my life. And I went up to some friends up in Lansing, which we've been going up there for 10 years. I must have got into something either in the brush or we golfed when we were up there. But when I came back, my upper chest and my neck was so inflamed and swollen I couldn't even swallow my pills anymore. And so they actually put me in the hospital for 4 days on an IV drip to try and take down that infection. But I had told them when I first came in that it itched a little bit. They said, well, that's no problem. We'll give you some Benadryl. And I said, I've got Parkinson's disease. They said, so? I said, are you sure? And I think Benadryl is one of the ones I'm not supposed to have. Because you know, when you get cold medication, there's very few that somebody with Parkinson's disease can take, or is supposed to take, because of that long word that's in all of them. It's an ingredient, it's Benadryl is what it is. But it doesn't play well with Parkinson's medications. And they said, well, let's look into that. And I thought, you're doctors and nurses. But there's actually a card, and I don't know if I brought any of them or not. I might not have thought to bring them. But actually, they talk about medications that are contraindicative with other medications in Parkinson's. It's pretty nice to have those around. I'm sorry I forgot to bring one. Other questions?
Yeah, I lost my brother when he was in his late 70s. And is this,
Hereditary? Is that what you're asking?
Yes, and just in here.
Once again, 10 years ago when I was diagnosed, that was one of my very first questions. Did I have to worry about my kids and my grandkids dealing with this disease as well? And I was told by the doctors at that time, there's no evidence that it's inherited at all. I went back to the same doctor today, and he's done his homework. You find out, and this is because of the money that Michael J. Fox and his foundation has put into the research. About a 35% chance that it's hereditary.
Yeah.
So it's not hereditary for everybody, but there are certain genes, and they've identified those genes. One of them is called the LARP1 gene.
I had a friend that the dad had it, and then later on the son has.
I haven't seen this one. This is one that Prasanta? Thanks. Mine was a little card that I stole from Wisconsin Parkinson's Association. I can make copies of this one. So that's the answer to the question. Yes, there are certain forms of the disease that are hereditary. But like in my case, I had 4 brothers besides myself. We all basically had the same genetic makeup. I did lose a brother to cancer, but nobody else in my family has Parkinson's disease. It kind of makes you wonder, well, if there's genetic links, what is it? Michael J. Fox says it pretty well again. I apologize if I quote him too much. He's kind of a hero of mine. But he says, you know, Parkinson's disease is a combination of being genetically predisposed to getting the disease, and then something happening environmentally that triggers it. So he says genetics loads the gun, the environment pulls the trigger. And then you get Parkinson's disease. So even though my brothers and I all have something similar in terms of genetic makeup, I've come into contact with something in my lifetime that they didn't. And I've kind of spent, it's not like I spend evenings thinking about this, but I've spent some time thinking about it, what it could be. You know, I used to work when I was going to school down in Iowa City. I used to work at Scheller Globe. And every morning I'd come in there, and this was before OSHA requirements, but they'd take me on a forklift to the top of this big chemical vat with a whole pallet full of bags of dry chemicals, and I'd rip them open with a utility knife and pour them in this vat, and they'd just overflow right back in my face all the time. I had no mask, no reason that I was thinking I need a mask. But I did that every day for a year, and none of my brothers did that. So could that exposure to those chemicals have done something with me? It might have, but you know, there's a lot of people that don't have that kind of exposure that don't have the disease either. So it's still a mystery. If we could get more money pumped into research, we probably could find out some of these things. But we are finding out more and more all the time. I put some brochures back there about the World Parkinson's Congress that's going to be held next fall in Portland, Oregon. And my wife and I had the chance to go to the one up in Canada. Memories eluding me here. It'll come back to me. But it was very encouraging to see like 3,500 people, and most of them doctors, researchers. You know, they're all trying to find these cures. And they think they're getting closer. But, you know, when there's only so much money allowed, it makes it harder.
And is the male more subject to this than
And
women?
females, yeah. It's almost 2 to 1. Not quite 2 to 1, but 60-40 is probably a little bit closer. But
Will we see these changes in our lifetime?
I don't think so. But at the slow pace that anything goes through the FDA anymore. I mean, 2 drugs that were just recently approved. One is called Rytari. It's a replacement for the carbidopa levodopa. It's done with a time release. Like, one of the things I'm noticing much more, and people used to tell me this when I first had the disease. They'd say, "How are your periods of on and off?" I'd look at them and I go, "What are you talking about?" Well, you know, when the medication's working, then when it's not working, you can feel it not working, then when it's working again, not working. I said, "I just take my pills. I don't know what you're talking about." Last 2 years, I found out exactly what they're talking about. When I know, when it's getting close to my pill time, my body tells me a half hour before I ever look at a clock and know that pills are going to be my next stop. But this Rytari is supposed to level out that playing field because it's got the time release component. But it's extremely expensive, and a lot of insurance carriers will pay the extra cost. They've got another one called Duopa that is a gel that's actually pumped right into your stomach. It's also supposed to be more effective than the pills that most of us take. But if they won't pay for Rytari, I don't think they're going to pay for anything pumped into my stomach either. So. But I don't think we can worry about, you know, is it going to... I choose not to worry about that anyway. I shouldn't say we shouldn't worry about it. My goal is that if I can do anything that might help my children and my grandchildren, if they would ever acquire this disease, then I'd be happy as a lark if I never got a different pill or a different therapy or anything, but I was able to help them. Or if I was able to help anybody else. I routinely volunteer for every study they have down at the university. You know, I won't go into details on some of them because they're not dinner talk, let's just put it that way. But I've done driver simulations, I've done all kinds of things down there, just in hopes that maybe there'd be something that would open up that might help somebody.
Anxiety level, very bad too, isn't it?
Yeah. Just kind of comes with that whole depression and anxiety. You know, and once again, I hate to say take pills for it, but it's about the only effective way to deal with it.
Would exercise help though?
Yes.
With that? Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Exercise helps everything.
Yeah.
And the mental, the puzzles and the Sudoku and all that helps tremendously. And I personally think the social interaction helps a great deal. Because a lot of that anxiety, a lot of that depression, I think, is because people bottle things up inside and they don't need to.
Yeah.
They can get out and talk to some other people about it, it's not so bad. Sometimes you look at somebody else and they got it much worse than you got. And
I find that reading a good book is a good way to makes you forget about your problems and the story.
yeah. I listen to books on CD a lot too, you know, when I travel.
Yep.
Almost to the point where I don't listen to much music anymore. But I have to change that because I need to listen to the music too, because that helps my voice. Anything else? There are no dumb questions.
Do you find that with Parkinson's, a lot of people are afraid of you because they don't know what it is?
No. I found actually just the opposite. I mean, there are always going to be people that, because they don't know something, they fear it. But I have found a tremendous amount of support in my friends and my family for the disease itself in terms of fighting it. Like I said, this whole golf outing thing has mushroomed into something much bigger than I ever anticipated it would be. If you'd have told me 10 years ago, I mean, when we first decided we were going to have this golf outing in Cedar Rapids, it was because they'd been having bake sales. You know, they make a couple $100 at a bake sale, and I said, we can do better than that, you know. I've been planning golf outings my whole life, you know, we can make thousands of dollars. And they said, oh, no, we can't. And I said, yes, we can. And after 9 years, they're believers that I knew what I was talking about. But you just are amazed at the people that come out. And when not necessarily a group like this, where I know there's a Parkinson's tie-in, but I will go other places and talk to somebody. I'll walk into some place and give them a sheet for the golf outing and say, would you like to help us? You know, invariably somebody will say, well, my grandfather had Parkinson's disease, or my uncle had Parkinson's disease, or my next door neighbor has Parkinson's disease. It really has impacted a lot of people in Iowa, and they're a lot more willing to help support us in our efforts to find the cure and ease the burden, which is what APDA, that's our dual mission. We'd like to find a cure, but what we can do locally, I mean, I hope what I've done today has helped ease some of your burdens. I hope the information was worthwhile. If not, I'm going back to Cedar Rapids, and I'm too far away. You can't reach me anymore anyway. So,
Can I get some of your friends?
can you have some of my friends?
Can I get some of
Yeah, there's some of them I'd like to get rid of. So. Especially the golf buddies that get a kick out of it when I zing a putt over there. Well, I've enjoyed speaking with you. I hope I've been somewhat informative. I know I'm always entertaining.
John, thank you so much for coming and talking to us tonight.